welcome back to the Shire. We are going to go through the tune, and what a fun time it was. It did turn into a bit of a project. There were some things that had to be done on the car that were requiring modification or exchange, not just the exchange of the motor to bring it to class compliance, even some work on the guide that we'll see. I did a couple different iterations of the guide. The wheel exchange, you can see now on the screen that it is more livery true. I haven't gotten a chance to paint the mirrors just yet. I've been pretty excited about the way the car is driving, but needless to say, boy, it certainly looks a heck of a lot better with those 12 spokes on there. And yeah, just super, super excited. And as it turns out, well, it turned out quite well. So let's take a dive here. So we have just about everything laid out here that we're going to use for this particular tune. At this time, you can see lots of deconstruction has already taken shape. There are two nice M2 set screw motor mount screws that go through this pod. Therefore, you have to take the rear axle out, and just nice and easy. The bushings are going to free float in there after you do that. Obviously, we're going to leave this engaged because there's no reason to take it out of there. It's engaged perfectly. You can hear in the background our slotted MX-16 23,000 RPM motor breaking in at 4 volts. We're going to change the motor wire to get greater depth to the guide. We've got our slotting plus guide right there. The 1001. We've got our CG slot cars motor adapter that is going to allow us to build a consistent cover to deal with the extra space that the short can that will end about right there will create, and then we'll fill in the rest of the gap in the back. We've got a guide spacer here. We'll figure out whether we want to go with a 0.1, a 0.2 perhaps. And then we've got all of our axle spacers out so that when we start dealing with the front wheels, the rear wheels will be independent of that. There won't be any need, as these are just going to sit equidistant out on the otherwise H-shaped rear end. We've got our set screw front axles that we'll also deal with. So let's get our 0.9. All right, a slot car tuner's best friend, the 0.9, for most cars anyway. We'll start out right at center depth, just a fraction inside of that center depth, and set it there with my thumb. Coming back, and we'll figure out where we want to be with some spacers. We're not going to lock that in too tight. Hopefully we can have some sort of movement with it still, but we'll have to begin to take a peek in here in terms of where we want this all to fit together, right? So we're going to have to see what kinds of spacers, what kinds of things we can do here in general. And I probably will end up using the NSR as a guide. Although honestly, the car body itself is still going to, oftentimes lead the way. The good news is I can already see plenty of the underside of the wheel well right there to know that I can at least get, oh gosh, a 0.1, maybe more. So we'll go ahead and we'll probably start with that conceptual aspect right now. really massage these into place. You know, you really want to get them over the top and as nicely seated as possible. I'm a big fan of the NSR Zero grips, and I'm a big fan of keeping the ride height consistent when I use them, so that in this case, these are very, very much, the 5202 very much meets the profile of a CB58. So let's take a look and see what we've got here. Just a little tip, little trick, line up your set screws so you don't have to do it again when you're making adjustments. It also would help if I didn't put the set screw on so far that I couldn't slip it on the axle. Apparently I still haven't done it any justice. I still have too much. Still have it threaded on too much. There we go. Yeah, that might be it. That might be the right choice there. The 0.1 might just be enough. The 0.01, pardon me, might be enough. Give ourselves a little bit of, just a fraction of play. Just a fraction more. Just a hair. That's what we're looking for, pre-lubrication. All right, now, gonna give us a break from the buzz. Give us a break from the buzz for a moment. So let's test fit. Let's test fit and take a look. Boy, I don't think that could be any more perfect. Not protruding down the sides of the car, well within rules and regulations, but just up against it. Look at that. Very nice. Very nice. Step one. Hey, why not complete the process? Let's get our spokes in. Start to get this car to look like the livery that it should be, right? It has a nice little grab. All these NSR ones have a nice little extra grab here, so that even though it's flashing where the part is made, it creates the place that allows these to be pushed in and seated well. There you have it on one side. There you have it on the other. And that is just, I mean, that is just much more familiar looking and much more how you would have expected that car to look. That's beautiful. And who knows? Maybe we'll find something for these. Maybe we'll find a purpose for these 5 spokes in the future. We'll turn around and do the same thing to the rear wheels. The air ride system, I don't have a problem with it. In fact, I like what I can see from the familiarity when the quick slicks wear in. Trade out back to our 1.3. Quick slick CB58. Quite easy to get them on the air ride rims. Let them just snap into place there, and real easy process to get them on the air ride rims, and then you can really feel their way into there and give them a nice snug in there. Sure. What in the world is going on there? Well, okay. It's not clear to me what that is, but it's not part of something we need. And there's another one in there. Almost looks like the manufacturing blank when that came out of there, the last bit of the drill. It is, in fact, indeed it is. The last bit of the drill out. How about that? There you go. The human touch. Okay. All right, let's complete the process here for the look and feel. Whoops, that was terrible on my part. Pressed that right past where I wanted it to be. How about we do it with it in my hand now instead? There we go. There we go. Well, it's good looking. Good looking wheel there, NSR. Thank you. Good looking insert. All right. So we haven't done anything to the front axle at this point in time. And I think we're going to need to start working on that front axle in conjunction with, or I don't know, we're going to need to start working with that front axle in conjunction with our guide. So we want to be able to get this ride height so that we're just touching the track. And I don't know a lot about the ride height of this chassis or this guide. It's a decent fit in there. Top of that's a little bit fluted. I don't know whether that was thoughtful or, I don't know about fluted, but it just might be. We already have some depth built in between, we already have some depth built in between the edge of that and where the gooseneck is. It's not a flat gooseneck, so seeing as the differences with that guide, I may have to account for that depth in the gooseneck right there, regardless of whether I want to or not. Seeing as if I can't get the guide to sit flat, that's not going to serve me a good purpose. See if it's possible to measure that depth. It should be possible. I'm showing it's about 1.2 millimeters or 0.04 inches. So to me, that's just begging for, at minimum, in order to make that gooseneck flat, that's begging for 2.002 spacers. The issue that I have in doing that is not that it's not going to get the job done to flatten that out, but the simple fact is the more things we add onto this guide shaft post, the more we're asking to overcome some issues in play that could creep in. But nonetheless, we have to start somewhere at a baseline. And we also have to start very carefully here to not lose all 10 of these at once. That'll do the trick for now. Take a moment to stop since I cannot adjust rear ride height, and I'm going to finish braking in the motor. And then we're going to work on the guide adjustment at the same time as the front wheels. For now, I'm going to go ahead and back the front wheels out to the point where I just have my tire exposed. That's just too much. I can see daylight right there coming through. So as we continue to break the motor in, there's another thing that was pointed out in the BRS hobby blog, is that both the shoulders of these screws can catch on the springs, but that the motor pod itself requires some file work or Dremel work around the edges, and I concur. Mine is absolutely, even if the screws, whether they're holding the problem up or not, this motor pod is, virtually not flexible, not just because of the fact that these screws, which are now virtually backed off all the way with a spring, but you can just hear all of that whoops, out of focus there for a second. You can just hear all of that rubbing. So we're going to go ahead and take this apart and we're going to work on that. This is one of those relatively simple things that goes a long way in the performance of a slot car. You will not achieve motor pod float if your motor pod is so tightly locked around the chassis that you cannot achieve any of that expected movement in here. If that is fit so tightly into there that all you're going to do is scrape and rub, as we've talked about many a times, then you're not going to achieve anything. So without hurting the integrity too much of this, and you can see that there are some flanges that rest inside of the chassis right there, I think I'm going to address the chassis first. I think I'm going to address the chassis opening first and not go too crazy on too much of this. I'm going to make those smooth. Those are very sharp edges. They're not rough. They're just sharp edge. But I'm first going to work on this. So you can see we've really, really scuffed this up good now. Gotten around all sides, even the flanges that are going to rest against this part here. And we've given this a good once over as well, really ensuring that there's nothing sharp left on it. Okay, at this particular moment, what we're going to do is we're going to test fit the motor to figure out some motor wire distance. So we're going to go find our find our 2mm hex. We're going to take our CG adapter. I put those screws in there. They did not come with it. I put those screws in there so they wouldn't get lost. So as far as this goes, you can use these adapters in numerous ways. You can put them on the front and the back of the motor. This is meant to go right on the end bell side. So you can see the plastic piece right there. Fits right into these very, very nicely. Again, a very thoughtful design. So, you just make up the distance that you need to. And in most cases on a long can, well, you need to put the last piece on there as well. To do our soldering work. Going to use the slot car corner wire this time. Okay, back at the tuning bench here, aka the race director's station, and we've got plenty of wire to be able to do whatever we want. Whether we come through the middle here and use this, probably not, and make our way and figure out the guide. So now that we're in place here, we can double check our torque screw one last time, not over tightening. Now would be optimal time to go ahead and put our rear axle assembly back into place. And why might I be measuring the motor shaft? Well, the motor shaft in a long can motor is different than the reverse side of a short can motor. So we have pivoted here just a little bit. And one of the things that was definitely, I don't want to say unexpected, when you mount the reverse motor mount that Slottick calls it, and you mount the shaft, you mount the pinion on the reverse end of the shaft, it's not altogether unexpected that if you're mounting this in what is a classic sense of if you were in a sidewinder or an angle winder configuration with your motor wires on this side and your pinion on this side, that this shaft wouldn't be a problem. But as it turned out, the shaft was forcing the spur gear to be out of alignment with the rear axle, so much so that it wouldn't allow the axle to even go into place. So as you can see, or maybe you can't see, but I'll bring it closer, I have dremeled the end of that shaft. Again, it's all about your comfort level to be able to do these kinds of transformations. In this case, you don't want to let this get overheated. It's going to take a little while. It's going to take maybe roughly 30, 45 seconds. So make your initial cut, make your initial mark, and when you start to feel the heat, back off a little bit. So maybe it takes you 2 or 3 passes to do it. But needless to say, it can be done. So we're going to come back in here and get our axle in place. And there you go. Easily free spinning, not a problem at all. Daylight, but yet still doing that classic lock into that little horseshoe shape there. So now we have to kind of start all over again and figure out where we want these. Well, now we have our first look at what I would say this car is supposed to look like. Oh, that's just a beautiful profile right there. Yeah. Okay, even more things to show. In the process of buttoning this up, what I've come to the conclusion is that while these screws must float through here, when the motor pod goes past here for the springs to engage, you still end up engaging in too much too much of the screw. So I'm going to go ahead and try and file that out a little bit. So what I've done here is actually taken this guide because of that gap that was discussed, and I've actually glued three 3.020s together just to actually fill in that gap right there from the gooseneck before even considering the distance further that I need to get. So Ninco clearly has cornered something on that, and that's why that sport guide works. But we'll continue on. Many minutes later, here we are. All right, so this is just the initial tune. We haven't done anything to the outside of the car as far as any body modifications. We haven't done any body float. We've got some motor pod float. We haven't figured out our body float. The body screws are still here, pardon me. But let's take an initial look. NSR wheels 17 by 8 in the front, 17 by 10 in the rear. So therefore, this car sits with the same footprint that an NSR Audi R18 would have.
These are 5204s. 5204s, I'll be all right. These are 5202 zero grips mounted on 17x8 NSR lightweight wheels with the NSR insert. These are NSR 17x10 air ride rims, again with the NSR insert, and CB58s. The wide footprint is what goes on the by-10s. So now you can see just how clean and beautiful the profile of this car looks. So we're just really in that position where we've taken ourselves to a baseline, both look and just, I'm sure that these wheels are, pretty decent wheels that they've given you. They look lightweight, but they don't fit the bill. And I'm going to trust an NSR rim pretty much over anything that you can throw at me on there. Maybe there's some other ones out there. Now, if we look at some of the other things that I'm going to be doing, they will be realizations. So from the stem up, this will be all red, both sides. However, if you look at the rear spoiler and the rudder for it, if you allow the expression, I cannot cut that in because I will be cutting off the Bosch logo and the B and maybe the O in the BOSCH. So I will leave the rear alone. And of course, I'm not going to mess around with this Castrol edge. It looks fine. The only folks that don't know the difference is, well, all of us. So let's take a look on the inside and we can see what has been exchanged at this point in time. So what has been done? I did stay with the same pinion that came with it. So we're 924 out of the gate. I love being at 267. Again, you can see now, if you're looking on the inside here, you can see that these are the NSR wheels. If you're familiar with the NSR spokes, the way that they do the inside of their wheels, they're drilled out. Very nice. You can see here, I exchanged the 2 screws that were on here for NSR screws that don't have shoulders threads on them. This is still not my favorite. There's movement, there's play. I'm going to have to go back and possibly even Dremel the edges of it. It is it's a stiff environment in the first place. Let's not kid ourselves. You've got springs there and it's, when you do motor pod float, it's stiff usually anyway until you really make it flexible. And this chassis may not need a piece of tape underneath it because of it, but there needs to be some more movement. But this nonetheless is the initial tune for now. The CG motor adapter, the slotted MX16 23,000 RPM motor that is class compliant for Le Mans prototype. Yes, I left the magnet in for the time being. Again, we have the 5202, which I believe are 19x10 zero grips, the 17x8 rims that are matching. So you're basically looking at a stock setup across the front for an NSR Audi R18 anyway. We've got the Slotting Plus 10101001 guide here. We've got NSR super soft braid. I actually may end up putting harder braid on there because I still do not like the distance that this guide sits. It may need to sit even lower, but I sacrificed getting it lower for the amount of play that's going to happen. You're eventually going to have too much play if the stem gets longer and longer. Oops, need to push that side in a little bit further. There we go. So eventually there's going to be, negative impact on that. I also may consider going back and drilling out the axle block a little bit higher. These are inconsequential at this point in time. As far as the set screws, the axle is already resting against the top of the axle block. So that's as low as that car can get. Whoops. That's as low as that car can get at this particular moment. You can see the guide has a ways to go, at least a millimeter or so to go before it's going to even hit what would be flush, never mind the relief on the track at this point in time. So there's some adjustments that can still be made on this car. Some of it's more fine tuning or, requires a little bit of a skill set to be able to do it. You can take a file and you can certainly try and get that axle block deeper. But if you mess up, well, then that's the end of the chassis. This axle block is part of the chassis. So let's check out performance before we go too far. There's a little bit of play in here for the springs, for the rear pod, for the motor pod in the rear, pardon me, to be able to flex in both directions. And this screw is turned back about a half a turn just so that it's, allowing for a leverage point, a pivot point as the 3 points of contact. Otherwise, it came out beautifully. I did take advantage of these. I think they're actually going to be useful. I ended up super gluing the wires on both sides for sake of argument, because we all know that these Le Mans prototypes and Group C cars have very low front end profiles underneath here. So there's not a lot you can do, and your guide wire is probably going to be jammed up against some of this. So what you might think holds true here, where you get a nice bounce back, you may not get that same thing once you actually put the body on top of it. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that you didn't do a good job with it. It just means that it's really difficult to have these wires, whether you're at 18 gauge or less, to be sitting there and not getting fouled up a little bit by the underside of the body, not a lot. But I did super glue the wires to the passages through there so that they didn't get caught up on anything having to do with our front axle. So that's our initial tune. And it's, again, pretty basic. The motor swap, the adapter to hold it in place, some adjustments to get the front end as low as possible, and the guide, and then the adjustment with the screws to be able to get those screws that don't have any shoulders on them. And the body does sit flush. I did question what was going on at first. It wasn't sitting flat, and it was because these screws were simply too high. I was trying to, create some real serious float, and you just can't do that. And I ended up trimming the screws, believe it or not, with a Dremel and making them sit even lower. So very nice, very clean on the inside of the car. And it's time to use our NSR screws that have the no thread on the shoulder so we can get some good body float. And it's time to put this R18 on the track. So, as I was saying here with the, I lost connection. I lost connection, but it's okay. I ran a 5.7, I ran a 5.6, and then I immediately ran a 5.5. And boy, I'll tell you something. There's no weight in this car, and there's some issues to deal with the float. But that being said, wow, it may not need weight. Who knows? Who knows if that's not even a thing to discuss right now. But 8 and 8 on the throttle, on the sensitivity and the brake, and car is just jumping out of the gate here. Well, there you go. I'm wow, and the rollout is beautiful, and I'm not even trying to do anything too exceptional. I'm overdriving it, and a 5.48. Now, again, let's not discount what's taken place already. I completely can appreciate where Ninco is coming from with their lightning wheels, but all around, I've got lightweight drill out air ride in the back, 17 by 10 NSR, 17 by 8 up front, and of course matching the livery with the 12 spoke that are in there for the inserts. And then of course I've done some work. I put what I would consider an upgraded guide in there. I've got body float from the screws that are the brass that don't have any shouldered threads. We've got the no shoulder thread on the suspension pod that is in there, and it's barely loose. I mean, it's pretty cranked down. You can't even really. It's hard to get it to interact from this angle. There you go. I got a little bit of action. I'd have to hold it up to the camera to show you that action that I'm getting. And again, the guide needs to come lower, but there are some good things here. The set screw front axle is, again, the axle's buried all the way to the top of the axle block. And I still think that I might be able to get even better conductivity. So I think we're in a great spot here. I'm going to keep driving this car for a few minutes and show the beauty of it. Maybe I can get further away from the track and you'll be able to see all the way through the sweeper. Wow, wow. I'm very impressed. Very impressed. Very impressed to say the least. 543 with everything that I've done. Maybe I won't lower the guide. I'm pushing on it and this car is not deslotting. Granted, do keep this one thing in mind, and it's a little bit of trickery as the tires wear in. There is certainly the occasion for a car to get faster as the break-in takes place. Now, I haven't taken off the sharp edges off of these CB58s. The CB58 mold doesn't produce that sharpened edge to begin with, say compared to a quick slick CB34 or a 35, even maybe a 48, 49 that fits stock on Fly Classics cars. So this could be improved. I can feel just a little sharp edge there as well. I haven't really even messed with the front tires. I did take a little bit of flashing off in the tuning itself. I think you can see a few times that I grabbed on the video. But at the end of the day, this is outstanding. It's a little bit odd. It's a little bit rattly. I'm not going to lie. This really strange coated ABS or whatever kind of plastic it is. The car's a little loud. It sounds a little weird compared to say a Slata or an NSR, but I'm telling you right now, and I haven't adjusted anything. I'm at 8 o'clock on the brake and 8 o'clock on the sensitivity. This car is running 5.4s. I may be able to get a 5.3 without even trying too much harder. In 19 laps, these are the first 19 laps on the car. So let's see if I can't turn a 5.3 in blue. Now a 5.3 in blue, we're starting to talk NSR for sure. The NSR Audi that I have, we're starting to talk Can-Am times, Thunderslot Can-Am times for sure, if we're running 5.3s consistently in blue. Well, I went for it that lap. That's a 5.37. So in theory, if that's a consistency situation and I can run 5.3s, I could run 5.37. That means take away your differential to the faster lane and I could run a 5.07 or a 5.0 something in yellow. Yeah, extraordinarily excited about this car, thrilled. And I still think there's more things that can be done. So what a shot out of the box and into its first iteration of the tune. Boy, let's make a few adjustments and see where it can't go next.
So there's our initial take on this Ninco Audi R18, the Le Mans winning livery from 2012. Now stay tuned for the real track testing and adjustments. This car just is the gift that keeps on giving. Truly one of my Christmas gifts. Happy to be in receipt and happy to keep pressing onward, making even a few more advancements. But that's a real deep dive right there into just what you can get out of this car and what you can change and what you can hope to expect. And if we're going to get one of these cars, they're not new by any stretch of the imagination, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a place in the slot car world for this Ninco. So, and if you like this kind of content, subscribe, set those notifications, and you'll find out when that next video is coming out so you can see just how well we do when we make a few more minor adjustments and we really hit a home run on the track. Until then, thanks for watching. That's all from Hobbit Racing.
If you don't subscribe to Hobbit Racing, I'll poke you with my staff. Pokey, pokey, pokey.
She will poke you with her staff.
Pokey!